In 1888, a Dakota homesteader named Lena Olson survived a 3-day blizzard. Buried inside a wall of frozen cow manure she had stacked herself. She lived. 40 of her neighbors did not. Today, survival experts spend hundreds of dollars on gear that does less than what she did with a shovel and a herd. Number 14 on this list was so effective, the Army quietly adopted it, then stopped teaching it. Number 3 keeps you warmer than a modern sleeping bag, and almost nobody alive knows how to build it. These 25 tricks were not hobbies. They were the thin line between waking up and freezing solid in the dark. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten shelter tricks that kept Americans alive. Number 25, the pine bough bed. Before foam pads and inflatable mattresses, the first rule of staying alive outdoors had nothing to do with a roof. It was the ground. The frozen earth pulls heat out of a sleeping body faster than the coldest wind, and a settler who lay directly on it was dead by morning. So they built a mattress out of the forest. You snapped armfuls of evergreen boughs, fir or spruce or pine, and layered them tips down, butt ends buried, shingled like roof tiles a full foot deep. The springy needles trapped a thick cushion of dead air between body and soil. Trappers in the northern woods called a good bough bed the difference between a hard night and a last one. It cost nothing but an hour of work, and that hour was never optional. A man too tired to build his bed was a man gambling with his life. Number 24, the debris hut. This was the shelter you built when the sun was going down and you had no tools, no tent, and no help coming. You found a long, sturdy pole, propped one end on a stump or rock, and that became your ridge line. Then you leaned shorter sticks along both sides like ribs, packed brush over the frame, and piled leaves, ferns, and forest litter on top until the whole thing was 3 feet thick. You crawled inside a space barely bigger than your own body and stuffed the inside with dry leaves too, until you were packed in like an animal in a den. That thickness was the whole secret. 3 feet of dry debris insulates better than most blankets. Frontier woodsmen and lost hunters survived sub-freezing nights this way with no fire at all, warmed by nothing but the heat of their own bodies, trapped in a pile of dead leaves. Number 23, the lean-to and fire reflector. The classic frontier shelter was a single slanted wall, and most people built it wrong. They faced it at the wind. The ones who lived faced the open side toward a fire and put their back to the weather. A settler would lash a crossbar between 2 trees, lean poles against it at an angle, and thatch the slope with bark, boughs, or sod so it shed rain and threw heat back down onto the sleeper. But the real genius was the second wall. Across the fire, they stacked a low wall of green logs or stones, a fire reflector that bounced the flame's heat back into the lean-to instead of letting it escape into the night. One fire warmed you twice. Mountain men swore that a lean-to with a good reflector was warmer than a tent, because a tent trapped your own breath into cold damp, while the open lean-to kept you dry and toasted. Number 22, banking the house with snow. When the first hard freeze came to the prairie, families did something that looks insane to modern eyes. They shoveled snow up against the outside walls of their own home, sometimes packing it 3 or 4 feet high all the way around. Snow seems like the enemy, but packed snow is full of trapped air, and trapped air is insulation. That white bank sealed the gap between the rough cabin boards where the wind whistled through, and it could raise the inside temperature by 10 or 15 degrees overnight without burning a single extra stick of firewood. Sod houses got the same treatment. In the Dakotas and Nebraska, a family that banked their soddy could sleep through a 40-below night in a 1-room dugout. The ones who left their walls bare to the wind burned through their winter wood by February and froze in March. Number 21, the bedroll under the wagon. On the cattle trails and the emigrant roads, the wagon was not just transportation. At night, it became the roof. A cowboy or a pioneer family would unroll their bedding in the dirt directly beneath the wagon bed, and that wooden floor above them turned the killing dew, the frost, and the rain. The high wheels and the canvas could be hung with a blanket to block the prevailing wind, creating a little three-sided room out of nothing. It kept the bedroll dry, which mattered more than almost anything, because a wet bedroll on a cold plain was a death sentence. Trail hands learned to check the slope before they crawled under, because a wagon parked on low ground became a bathtub in a midnight thunderstorm. Picked right, that patch of dirt under the axle was the safest, driest bed for 1,000 miles. Number 20, the haystack burrow. Every farm had a haystack, and on the coldest nights of the year, that stack of dried grass became an emergency bedroom that beat the drafty farmhouse. A farmhand caught out late, or a child sent to tend stock, would burrow straight into the side of the stack, hollow out a body-sized cave, and pull the loose hay back over the opening. Hay is one of the best insulators a poor man ever had, full of dead air and bone dry in the center. People slept warm in a haystack at 20 below with nothing but their work clothes. The danger everyone knew was fire and suffocation, so you left a gap to breathe, and you never ever brought a lantern. Plenty of tramps riding the rails through farm country in the 1930s survived the winter doing exactly this, one haystack at a time. Number 19, hot rocks in the bed. Long before the rubber hot water bottle, the working answer to a freezing night was a fire-heated stone. You picked smooth, dense rocks, never wet river rocks because trapped moisture made them crack and explode. And you set them at the edge of the fire for an hour until they soaked up the heat clear through. Then you wrapped each one in a thick cloth or an old sock and tucked it into the foot of your bedroll. A good rock the size of a loaf of bread would throw gentle warmth for 5 or 6 hours, carrying a sleeper through the deadly middle of the night when the fire had burned to coals. Pioneer mothers heated bricks on the stove and slid them into the children's beds the same way. It was free heat, stored in stone, released slowly, exactly where a cold body needed it most. First pattern break. Here is where the real lesson hides. Every single trick on this list is fighting the same enemy, and it is not the cold air. It is heat loss. A human body is a furnace burning around 100 watts, and it dies not because the world is cold, but because the world steals that 100 watts faster than the body can make it. 4 thieves do the stealing. The ground conducts it away. The wind carries it off. Rain and damp wick it out 40 times faster than dry air. An open sky radiates it into space on a clear night. The old-timers did not have the science words, but they understood the enemy perfectly. Every shelter they built was an answer to one of those 4 thieves. Stop the ground, block the wind, stay dry, cover the sky, get all 4, and you live. Miss one, and the cold finds the gap. Number 18, the snow trench. Out on the open plains and the high country, there were no trees to build with, but a man caught in a blizzard had one material in unlimited supply, the snow trying to kill him. The fastest shelter on earth was a snow trench. You dug a slot in the drift just wide enough to lie in, roofed it with whatever you had. A tarp, branches, blocks of cut snow leaned together and crawled in below the surface of the wind. Down in that trench, the howling gale passed harmlessly overhead, while the snow walls held in your body heat. Inside a sealed snow shelter, the temperature climbs to near freezing, even when it is 30 or 40 below. Outside, because snow is half-trapped air. Herders and soldiers learned that the snow was not the enemy. It was the building material. The men who fought it died. The men who dug into it survived. Number 17, the Quincy Snow Mound. When the snow was too loose and powdery to cut into blocks, frontier travelers borrowed a trick from the northern tribes and built a quingy. You heaped snow into a giant dome, a mound taller than a man, then let it sit for an hour or two. Something strange happens in that pause. The disturbed snow crystals rebond and harden in a process called sintering, turning a loose pile into a solid shell strong enough to hollow out. Then you tunneled in from the side and carved out a room, leaving the walls about a foot thick, and poked a single vent hole in the roof so you did not suffocate. A candle or a small lamp inside would warm the dome above freezing while a storm raged outside. It took sweat and an hour of patience, but a quingy turned a featureless snowfield into a survivable home. Number 16, the firebed. This is the one that sounds like a death wish and is actually a stroke of genius. On a bitter night with no shelter, you dug a trench as long as your body and 1 foot deep, then built a fire in it and let it burn down to coals over a couple of hours. You raked the coals out, packed a thick layer of dirt back over the warmed earth, and then lay down on top. The ground itself became a heated mattress, releasing stored warmth up through the soil all night long. The trick that killed careless men was the dirt layer. Too thin and you cooked your bedroll or roasted yourself awake. Too thick and no heat came through. Done right, the firebed solved the deadliest problem in the wild, the heat-stealing ground, by turning that same ground into the source of warmth. Trappers and prospectors used it through Rocky Mountain winters. Number 15, the dugout in the hillside. The first homes of countless prairie and frontier families were not built. They were excavated. With no timber for miles, a settler would cut into the side of a hill and dig out a room, walling the front with sod bricks and roofing it with poles, brush, and a foot of earth. 3 sides of the home were living soil, and that was the point. The ground a few feet down holds a steady temperature year-round, cool in the killing summer and warm in the murderous winter, never freezing solid. A dugout that cost nothing but labor stayed warmer in January than a fine wooden house in town, because dirt is one of the best insulators on the continent. Families raised children in these earthen rooms for years until they could afford lumber. Snakes and bugs came through the dirt walls, the roof leaked mud when it rained, but the dugout did the one thing that mattered. It kept them alive. Number 14, the earth-banked soldier's shelter. Here is the trick the Army learned and quietly stopped teaching. Soldiers, hunters, and homesteaders discovered that the warmest small shelter was one dug partly into the ground and bermed over with earth on every side, a half-buried roofed pit. By sinking the floor below grade and piling dug-out soil against the low walls and over the roof, the shelter borrowed the Earth's stable underground temperature and sealed out the wind almost completely. A tiny fire or a single lamp could heat the buried space because there was so little air to warm and so few cracks for the heat to escape. Cold weather survival manuals once detailed these earth shelters in careful diagrams, because a soldier who could dig one could survive a night that would kill a man in a tent. As gear got lighter and warmer, the knowledge faded out of the training, but the principle never stopped working. Earth is free, and Earth keeps you alive. Number 13, the bark slab roof. In the deep woods, the difference between a wet, deadly night and a dry one was a sheet of bark. Frontiersmen learned to peel large slabs of bark, elm, birch, or spruce, from felled trees in long curved sheets, then lay them over a pole frame, shingled like a roof so the rain ran off instead of through. Birch bark was the prize because it was naturally waterproof, and the northern tribes had used it for canoes and lodges for centuries. A bark-roofed lean-to or wigwam stayed bone dry inside while the storm hammered down. And staying dry was the whole game, because a wet man loses heat dozens of times faster than a dry one. The bark could be rolled up and carried to the next camp. It was a roof you harvested from the forest with a knife, and it turned a leaky pile of branches into a genuine waterproof shelter. Number 12, the wickiup. The wickiup was the fast, round brush shelter of the western tribes, and settlers and prospectors copied it because it worked and went up in an afternoon. You set several long poles in a cone or dome, lashed them at the top, then covered the frame with whatever the land offered: brush, grass, reeds, bark, or hides, layering it thick. A small fire could burn in the center with a smoke hole at the peak, drawing the smoke up and out, so a man could have warmth and shelter together in one round room. The conical shape shed wind and rain, and was strong against the weather. Unlike a heavy canvas tent that had to be hauled in a wagon, the wickiup was built fresh from the materials at hand wherever you stopped. For travelers crossing country with no lumber and no tent, it was a home that grew straight out of the ground beneath their feet. Second pattern break. Now here is the part the camping industry would rather you never think about. Almost every shelter on this list is free. Pine boughs, dead leaves, snow, dirt, bark, hay, river stones. None of it has a price tag, none of it has a brand, and none of it can be marked up and sold to you. That is exactly why the knowledge disappeared. There is no advertising budget behind a pile of leaves. No company gets rich teaching you to dig a hole in a snowbank when they can sell you a $400 tent and a $300 sleeping bag instead. So the old skills got quietly replaced by gear, and gear gets left at home in the closet the one day you actually need it. The pioneers could not run to a store. Their shelter was built from whatever was within arm's reach, and that meant they were never truly without one. The land itself was the hardware store. We just forgot how to shop there. Number 11, newspaper insulation. During the Great Depression, the homeless and the broke discovered that the cheapest insulation in America was already being thrown away on every street corner. Newspaper. A man sleeping rough would stuff crumpled paper between his shirt and his coat, line his shoes with it, and pile a thick layer of sheets over himself like a blanket. The papers trapped dead air the same way expensive down does, and a stack of newsprint could mean the difference between shivering and freezing. They called the papers Hoover blankets, a bitter joke aimed at the president they blamed for the hard times. Families lined the inside of drafty walls with layers of newspaper and flour paste to seal out the wind. It was the insulation of people who had absolutely nothing, and it worked on the same physics as a modern winter coat. Trapped air is trapped air, whether it costs $300 or whether you fished it out of a trash can. Number 10, sharing body heat. The oldest survival technology on Earth is another warm body. Pioneers, trail hands, and entire families understood without being told that two people sharing one bedroll generated and held far more heat than two people sleeping apart. On the brutal nights, whole families piled into a single bed under every quilt they owned, children in the middle where it was warmest, parents on the cold outsides. Trail partners slept back to back. The math is simple. Each body is a furnace, and pressed together, they cut the surface area, losing heat to the cold while doubling the heat being made. Mountaineers and lost hikers have walked out alive specifically because they huddled instead of spreading out. It cost nothing and required no equipment, only the willingness to set pride aside and get close. In a world before central heating, the warmest place in the house on a January night was simply next to another person. Number 9. The buffalo robe. On the northern plains, the single most valuable cold weather item a person could own was a tanned buffalo hide. A full winter buffalo robe, thick with dense curly fur, was warmer than any wool blanket ever woven, and people paid dearly for them. Wrapped in a buffalo robe, a person could sleep on open ground in a blizzard and wake up alive. Travelers lined the floors of their wagons and shelters with them, slept under them in stacks, and wore them as coats against the wind. The fur trapped a deep layer of warm air against the body, and the heavy hide blocked the wind completely. A good robe was passed down and traded like money. When the great herds were slaughtered and the robes vanished, the plains became a far deadlier place to be caught out at night, and an entire way of surviving the winter went with them. Number 8, the root cellar refuge. The root cellar was dug to keep potatoes and preserves from freezing, but in an emergency, it saved people too. 6 feet down, surrounded by earth on every side, the cellar held a steady temperature that never dropped below freezing, no matter how savage the air above turned. When a blizzard tore the roof off a barn or a tornado threatened the house, families went down into the cellar, and the same earth that kept the carrots from freezing kept the people alive. The thick door at the top sealed against the wind, and the deep dirt walls held the warmth of the planet itself. A family with no firewood left could still survive a cold snap underground, where the dirt did the work the fire could not. It was a survival shelter that every farm already had, built for vegetables, ready for people when the night turned deadly. Number 7, the cat face and the hollow tree. A traveler caught by darkness in old-growth forest sometimes found shelter already built and waiting. A hollow tree. The giant trees of the American forests were often burned and rotted out at the base into a cavity called a cat face, big enough for a person to step inside and stand sheltered from wind and rain. A small fire at the mouth, carefully tended so it did not light the whole tree, turned a hollow trunk into a warm chimney that drew smoke straight up and out. Hunters and lost woodsmen sheltered in these standing hollows through storms that would have killed a man in the open. Some were big enough for 2 or 3 people. It was the laziest shelter on this list because nature had already done the building. And a sharp-eyed traveler who knew to look for that dark opening at the base of a giant tree could find a roof and 4 walls without lifting a single branch. Third pattern break. Here is what nobody tells you about all of this. The deadliest mistake was never the lack of a shelter. It was waiting too long to build one. Cold does something cruel to the human mind. As the body loses heat, judgment goes first, long before the danger feels real. People who froze to death were often found having done the wrong thing entirely, taking off their coats, wandering in circles, lying down to rest in the snow. The old-timers had a rule burned into them by hard experience. Build your shelter while you still have the strength and the sense to do it. In the last hour of daylight, not in the panic of full dark, when your fingers no longer work and your mind has started to lie to you. The pioneers who survived were not the strongest. They were the ones who stopped early while they could still think and put a roof over their heads before they needed it. Number 6, banking with manure and straw. On the treeless plains, fuel and insulation were so scarce that families used the one thing the herd produced in endless supply. Dried cow and buffalo manure, called buffalo chips, burned clean and hot when there was no wood for 100 miles, and packed manure mixed with straw made a thick insulating bank around a barn or soddy wall that sealed out the wind and even gave off a faint warmth as it composted. The animals themselves were part of the system. Families bedded their stock against the downwind wall of the house, and the heat thrown off by a few cows pressed close to the cabin warmed the whole structure. It was not pretty and it was not pleasant, but on a frozen prairie where there was nothing else, the herd gave fuel, gave heat, and gave a windbreak. The settlers who turned up their noses at it were the settlers who ran out of warmth first. Number 5, the oilcloth and the rubber poncho. Fourth pattern break. The single greatest leap in frontier shelter was not a structure at all. It was waterproof cloth. A sheet of canvas soaked in linseed oil, or later a rubberized gum blanket, was light enough to fold into a saddlebag and would shed rain completely. Strung between two trees as an A-frame, staked low against the wind, or simply wrapped around a bedroll, that one sheet did the most important job in survival. It kept you dry. Soldiers in the field were issued rubber ponchos and gum blankets precisely because a dry soldier fought and a wet one died of exposure. A cowboy's slicker doubled as a shelter roof and a ground sheet. The reason this mattered so much comes back to the four thieves. Water steals body heat dozens of times faster than dry air, so a single waterproof sheet could save a life that 10 blankets could not, simply by stopping the wet from ever reaching the skin. Number 4, the cliff overhang and rock shelter. The earliest Americans understood something modern campers forget. The best shelter is often the one you do not have to build. A south-facing cliff overhang or a shallow cave gave instant protection from rain, snow, and wind, with a solid stone roof that no storm could tear off. But the real magic was thermal. Rock soaks up the sun's heat all day and radiates it slowly back through the cold night, so a person camped under an overhang where the afternoon sun had struck the stone slept in gentle warmth long after dark. The ancient cliff dwellers of the Southwest built entire cities into these overhangs for exactly that reason. A traveler who knew to seek out a rock shelter facing the low winter sun got a free heater built into the wall. Wind-blocked, sky-covered, ground dry, and warm stone at your back. It was the most complete shelter on the list, and the land built it for free. Number 3, the double-wall snow house. This is the one warmer than your modern sleeping bag, and almost nobody can build it anymore. Borrowed from the masters of cold weather survival in the far north, the true snow house was made of cut blocks of dense, wind-packed snow, laid in an upward spiral that leaned in and locked into a self-supporting dome. Inside, the builder carved a raised sleeping platform because cold air sinks. The sleeper lay up high on the warm shelf, while the freezing air pooled in a pit by the entrance and drained out the low tunnel door. A single lamp or a body's own heat would warm the dome to near freezing, while 60 below, wind screamed across the surface. The packed snow walls held the heat and blocked the wind absolutely. Skilled builders raised one in an hour. It is genuinely warmer than most gear sold today, and the knowledge of how to cut and spiral those blocks has nearly vanished from the lower 48 entirely. Number 2, the wigwam. The wigwam was the engineered home of the eastern woodland peoples, and it was a marvel of warmth that settlers never fully matched. A frame of bent saplings was lashed into a dome, then covered in overlapping bark slabs or woven cattail mats layered like shingles, with a small smoke hole at the top, and a low door hung with a hide flap. The rounded shape shed wind and held heat efficiently. The cattail mats trapped air like insulation, and a central fire pit warmed the whole dome, while smoke drew cleanly out the peak. Families lived in them through full New England winters. The mats could be rolled up and the whole home moved or rebuilt with the seasons. Unlike a square cabin full of cold corners and drafty cracks, the wigwam was sealed, round, and warm. A portable, renewable, weatherproof home built entirely from the marsh and the forest. It was thousands of years of refinement in a single dome. Number 1, the fire and the windbreak. At the very top of this list is something so simple it almost feels like a cheat, and yet it kept more people alive than anything else humans ever devised: a fire with a wall behind it. Not an elaborate structure, not a buried shelter, just a fire built against a reflecting surface, a rock face, a fallen log, a bank of stacked snow, with a person sitting between the heat and a windbreak at their back. This is the shelter of the absolute last resort, the one you build when you have nothing, no tools, no gear, no time. And it has saved lost hunters, stranded travelers, and freezing children on 1,000 bad nights. The fire makes the heat. The body cannot make fast enough. The reflector throws it back instead of wasting it. The windbreak stops the thief that steals it. Every other trick on this list is a refinement of this one ancient idea. Master fire and a windbreak, and you can survive a night that kills everyone who never learned how. Here is the challenge. Pick one of these and actually try it this winter, somewhere safe in your own backyard. Build the pine bough bed, dig a snow trench, stack a fire reflector, and feel the difference. Then come back and tell me whether the old-timers were just tough or whether they knew something we traded away for gear we leave in the closet. Drop the one you would build in the comments. I want to know if the snow house gets more respect than the fire bed, because these were never just camping tricks. They were the reason your great-great-grandparents lived to morning.